Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or early evening, depending on where you might be. And welcome to the Women in Transplantation special event featuring today Women in Donation for the very first time. I'm Lori West. I'm your host today for this WIT event. And our moderator is going to be Vanessa Silva y Silva, who's joining from Ontario. And I'm going to start out just by giving us, by welcoming you all and giving a brief background of the Women in Transplantation initiative of the Transplantation Society. So let's just start there. So I'm the immediate past chair of the Women in Transplantation Initiative, which is an initiative of the Transplantation Society. Our mission, when we were founded more than 10 years ago now, I guess probably 12 years ago now, by Dr. Catherine Wood, Professor Catherine Wood, who was the first woman president of the Transplantation Society. Our mission was to advance, and still is, to advance and inspire women transplant professionals and champion issues of sex and gender in transplantation. And our vision is worldwide gender equity and inclusiveness in transplantation. And of course, we apply that also or support that also in the associated fields, obviously of donation, but of other transplant and health-related specialties, and indeed beyond those. The current WIT executive is composed of Dr. Roza Manin, who is a professor of medicine at University of Nebraska Medical Center, and Beth Foster, who is the chair of the Department of Pediatrics at McGill University in Montreal. And we used to be just one kind of organization. And a number of years ago, probably about 4 years ago now, we held a strategic planning retreat where we decided to actually organize ourselves into several pillars because our membership was growing and our interests in other activities were also growing. So pillar one, WIT pillar one, is advancing and inspiring women transplant professionals. And this is what we started out as. Our current lead is Anita Chong in Chicago in North America. And pillar one remains dedicated to advancing women professionals by enhancing their participation in the profession in education activities, networking activities, and really supporting each other in both formal and informal mentorship activities. We're also focused on ensuring equity in transplantation professional society leadership, so supporting women to take on leadership roles in the various societies, increasing the percentage of women speakers in international and national meetings. And we do this by encouraging the program organizing committees, not only to be sure that they include women on the program committees, but also include women as speakers and moderators in the general percentage that reflects the membership of those other organizations. And also we support and advocate for monetary grants and awards to women transplant professionals. Pillar two emerged during that strategic planning retreat in terms of championing. We realized that we were well placed to champion issues of sex and gender in transplantation. And of course, ensuring these should not be issues related simply to women, but we nonetheless found ourselves well positioned to lead the way and become champions. This pillar two, is led by Germaine Wong in Sydney. And this is focusing on establishing sustainable funding for projects, including data collection, research, education, and so on, to address issues of sex and gender, and to establish educational contributions with designated sessions on issues of sex and gender at major international and national meetings, including organ-specific meetings. And so we've, some examples of these are encouraging, for example, one of my main societies is the International Society of Heart and Lung Transplantation, inclusion of topics actually related to sex as a biologic variable and gender as a psychosocial variable in the content of the meetings. And that's been highly successful. And so we've extended the educational content through for many meetings through the pandemic years, also through virtual meetings. Mediums, and we are leading also, in addition to that, to representation of content at meetings, but also efforts for publication standards on sex and gender. And again, Amanda Vinson has led a wonderful effort in this regard, which is in press currently in Transplantation. Additionally, our newest pillar is Pillar 3, which is really devoted to advocacy and addressing disparities where they exist. And this is led by Bianca Davidson from South Africa, and is focused on increasing the percentage of female organ transplant recipients in countries where there are noted to be disparities, and decreasing these disparities in the number of male and female living donors worldwide. And as I said, this is a new pillar and is still growing, and the goals, the specific goals, will be further clarified as this pillar continues to grow. 2021, despite it being this crazy pandemic year, has been a very busy year for us, and these are listed some of the many activities that WIT has held throughout the year around the globe. From the Asian Society of Transplantation to the Transplant Society of Australia and New Zealand, as I mentioned, ISHLT, ESOT, ATC, and so on. And recently, the Canadian Society of Transplantation, where Roz, together with Jeremy Chapman and Sandy Feng, held a wonderful session as panelists on professional development in transplantation. And so this continued throughout the year and keeps us busy. Some of the specific initiatives led by Anita Chong in Pillar 1 was the Picture a Scientist initiative, which is, if you haven't seen it, which is a very compelling documentary film. WIT acquired the license for this and held virtual meetings that were kind of like, sort of like journal clubs and events really all around the world, looking at discussing this particular documentary and its content, and how we could deal with events depicted here in our own countries and societies. Another amazing advance that WIT took on this year, and I say amazing because it was championed and led by our chair, Roz Mannon, was the development of the WIT Fellowship Program. And what Roz did was leveraged funding from industry, establishing the first WIT Fellowship Awards that began in July of this year, with two sponsors, Sanofi and One Lambda, who each sponsor one of the awards. And the aim for this was to promote the careers of young researchers in the field of sex and gender issues in both solid organ transplantation as well as immunology. And the spectrum of studies that could be supported here could include really across the streams of research, basic, clinical, and translational investigation. And the grant had an expert peer review that was carried out within Pillar 2 using noted experts in the field. And we will have a targeted webinar in January coming up to showcase the initial research findings of the award winners. And I'd like to just point out who those award winners are. Here you can see them depicted: Dr. Rizky Sugianto, who is working with Annette Melk in Germany, looking at cardiovascular morbidity in girls with chronic kidney disease and transplantation. And the second one, Dr. Frederike Martin, supported by the Sanofi grant and mentored by Dr. Stefan Tullius in Boston on the impact of sex hormones on alloimmunity. So we're very proud of this program, and we're especially proud that we have a commitment for continued partner support through 2024. The award site has just opened, so please encourage young trainees to join this and have a look at that. The ongoing efforts now that came out of a strategic planning session earlier this year include continuing to expand our relationships and collaborations, both with the Transplantation Society and some new work with the Asian Society of Transplantation, especially with the work of Dr. Curie Ann, looking at gender disparity in their as we can probe the registries there, advancing our engagement in both Africa and South America. We have one of our speakers today, in fact, is from our wonderful charter chapter in Brazil, which started a couple of years ago now and is very active and very enthusiastic. We're also collaborating with other organizations, as well as expanding into other non-renal organs. And I'm so happy to say also, my graphics disappeared here, but also into the donation communities as we see today. We're also continuing to update our website and optimizing our speakers bureaus. And our WIT Awards will be open in May of this year for this year's upcoming WIT Awards as an annual basis. So we're also active on social media, you can see we've got dedicated assistance from Katie Tate and others who help us with the social media. And so, yes, here we are, and donation, I'm happy to add there. So we're very excited about reaching our colleagues in the world of donation. And once again, we want to thank our sponsors, Veloxis, One Lambda, Novartis, and Sanofi. And I'm going to turn it over now to Vanessa Silva y Silva, who is just moving into a new position as an assistant professor in the Faculty of Nursing at Brock University, and she's going to moderate our session and introduce our speakers for today. So welcome, everybody. We're very happy to have you here. Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Great presentation as usual. And it's an honor to be here today moderating this session. I have always been a fan of women in transplantation. I think it's an incredible endeavor to support women worldwide in donation and transplantation. And I'm happy because I'm a former organ donor coordinator, and I've dedicated my whole professional life to support organ donation research worldwide. And I'm happy to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Gofton completed her medical school at Dalhousie University in Halifax here in Canada, followed by a neurology residency training at Western University. She has a dual fellowship training in hospice and palliative medicine at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, and in neurocritical care and electroencephalography at Western University. And Dr. Goffton is currently an associate professor at Western University in the Department of Clinical Neurological Sciences. She is the acting director of the Neurocritical Care Fellowship Training Program. Dr. Goffton has been an invited speaker at national and international meetings and has received research grant support from national funding agencies. Her research interests and publications are on topics in neurocritical care and neuropalliative care. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Goffton. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that kind introduction. I'm going to try share screen here. I have a few slides. Can you see my slides okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So this is really pretty informal. I created the slides mostly because I felt wrong not having PowerPoint slides on a Zoom call, to be honest. But this is mostly just to help me go through a few things with you about my career and what I think are important elements kind of on the non-research side. So who am I? The introduction or bio that was provided was focused on my work life, but obviously that's not all of it. I'm a mom at home, and I try balance my family life with my work life, obviously. And so I like the slides because I can put up pictures of my lovely family here. So big things that I like to do are hanging out with my kids and playing hockey in our neighbor's backyard. So at work, as was kindly outlined, I am a neurologist and a palliative medicine specialist, and also clinician researcher. I did not start out in transplantation research, and I sort of found my way there as my career developed. So I think that's a product, again, of a few things that I'll talk about that have been really important for me. So I started my career as an assistant professor in 2012. with a dual interest in neuropalliative care and neurocritical care. My daughter was born in December 2012, so things didn't take off from a professional point of view, but it was wonderful to have her as part of our life. I have had a lot of research collaborations, I think, from early on that were experiences I never could have planned for, things that just fell into my lap that have really shaped where I have come to. So I think one of the things I've learned as I've gone through my career is that you can't plan where it's going to be in 5 years because you don't know what opportunities are going to come up and what's going to be really interesting. And one of those for me as a neurologist with palliative medicine and neurocritical care training was in the donation realm. And I absolutely never planned for that. So I'm glad it happened though. We're several years later now in 2021, and a large part of my work from a research point of view is with the New Park program, which I'll talk about a tiny bit. I also have interest in status epilepticus and neuroimaging for prognostication and neuropalliative care. So I'm going to talk about the New Park program so you guys understand how I fit in with donation. The New Park program is something that I have been growing with Murat Slesareb over the last couple of years. And what we have been looking at is the timing of cessation of brain activity in relation to circulatory arrest in the setting of withdrawal of life-sustaining therapy to better inform organ donation after DCD. So essentially right now we assume when brain activity ends or stops, but we don't actually know that for sure. And so what we're looking at is the timing of cessation of cortical activity in relation to circulatory arrest, if we can estimate when brainstem electrical activity will change in relation to circulatory arrest, and also looking at estimated changes in cognitive processing during the withdrawal of life-sustaining process. In order to see if we can give some insight as to when people may be able to have consciousness or when that is no longer possible. And so this is a pretty big program from the point of view that it's taken many years to grow it, but the part of it that I like and enjoy the most is I think manifested by this slide. And the group that we have brought together with the New Park study, some of the folks are on the line, and Jennifer is on the line. And I think the best part for me is that we have many different groups. So we have the basic science aspect that I just talked to you about in the ICU, where we're trying to get the clinical data that relates to circulatory arrest and brain function. But we also have an ethics group, a bioethics group that's done a lot of work concurrently with us. We have our legal team that is also working on related issues within the law, and we're developing a social sciences aspect, looking at Indigenous perspectives and how they relate to organ donation also. And so for me, the ability to have got a group together that is so interprofessional and multidisciplinary has been a real highlight for me, because it's a place where I learn a lot. As much as I bring stuff to the group from the point of view of my experience and my medical background, I gain so much more from working with this collaborative group. So one of the essential issues for me with my own work and research and my professional satisfaction is really the interdisciplinary aspects of our team, the fact that I learn so much from all the different perspectives and how we can explore this single issue from many angles. And so for me, that's really rewarding. And one of the things I wanted to share that I find has been really helpful in my career is that before I even realized it, I think mentors were paving the road for me, both formal mentors, but informal mentors. And they have really helped me in so many ways. And when I say they've paved the road for me, I think people gave me chances from very early on. In my first year of my job, I was on the steering committee for a large study, which was something I didn't have experience with, but clearly they were giving me a chance and an opportunity to learn and grow from. And I've tried to take that away from my early career experiences and all of the help that I was provided by mentors, and try and feed that forward to younger colleagues who are now coming after me and seeking mentorship, because our roles have sort of reversed a little bit. And so for me, the big things that helped were the friendships I've had from a lot of mentors, but also when they've thoughtfully made recommendations for committees or provided support from the point of view of methodology learning or just plain moral support. And I think the mentorship really has been the biggest part of my career from the point of view of opening new opportunities. And that's how I ended up in this in this area where I've been doing research pertaining to organ donation, which is, as I said earlier, something I never had planned on 15 years ago. So for me, I've learned in my career that people took chances for me that provided opportunities for me. So I try hard to take chances also with other people. Murat and I, who are co-PI for this study, I met Murat when he was a fellow, and he proposed when I was doing the study with the EEG for this early on. He said, hey, why don't we do this with transcranial Doppler? And I thought about it and I was like, gee, I don't know Murat very well. It's only been a few months that we've been working together, and he's a fellow, but you know, he's got a good idea. And so we hashed it out, and I think that was a chance, but it worked out really well. And so chances can really lead to positive places. You know, I had some challenges early in my career also with some negative experiences. And so I learned also that other people's actions on me could have a big influence in actually shaping my career trajectory. And so I've tried to be really cognizant of that with peers and younger colleagues who are coming through. And one of the other things I think that I find helpful for my career is always seeking input from mentors and colleagues, because sometimes people have great ideas that you never thought of. And that's something that I find really comes up in our interdisciplinary group. And I really, really appreciate. So what I enjoy most about working in donation research is certainly the science is important to me, but I think it's mostly the people I work with in a lot of different areas now. In our research group, but also in the greater donation community in Canada that I've become much more intertwined with, and over the last few years I've got to know very well. That it's an incredibly supportive group with excellent mentors, and I think people giving me a chance very early in my career helped me to develop and seek opportunities I never thought were possible. So these are my pearls and experiences from my career. That's all I have for sharing.
Thank you very much. That's a lovely presentation, and it's really inspiring to see how your career has developed so well. I'll ask you all to type in your questions in the chat box while we have the presentations, and we're going to have a few minutes in the end to answer the questions. And I'm going to introduce the next speaker now. Jennifer Chandler holds a degree in law from Harvard University and Queen's University, and a degree in biology from Western University. She joined the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Law in 2002. Her research, she researches and writes about the legal and ethical aspects of biomedical science and technology, with focus on mental health, law and policy, neuroethics, organ donation, and regenerative medicine. She contributes to work on legal policy and the administration of justice in Canada as a member of the board of directors of the Canadian Institute for the Administration of Justice, and is active in public policy in organ donation and transplantation as a member of the ethics committees of the Ontario Treaty and Gift of Life Network and Canadian Society of Transplantation. She holds the Bertrand Law Research Chair at the University of Ottawa, leading several research teams addressing trust in the organ donation, tissue donation system, family decision-making at the end of life, and the law and ethics of end-mortem intervention intended to support organ donation. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. And first off, I just want to apologize for my voice. This is my first cold in 2 years. I was tested. It's not COVID, I'm happy to say, but it's the product of having gone for my first in-person meeting a week ago, and look what has happened. But anyway, I apologize for my voice and hope you can hear and understand me. So I guess where I thought I might start is just observing that my attention was drawn to organ donation and transplantation in a way that perhaps is often the case for non-medical people by a personal experience. And so it was in my late 20s. This was the tech bubble of the late 90s and early 2000s. And let me just open a parenthesis to say, as an aside, tech bubble. Not much of a tech bubble. The longer view really shows us that our technological evolution is millennia old and has shaped us as much and our societies as much, every bit as much as we think we've shape and choose the tools that we use. And indeed, it underlies the astounding medical and social achievement that is organ donation and transplantation. and continues to pose challenges which have occupied my legal and ethical, my career in law and ethics as an academic lawyer, looking at how our continued technological evolution poses and continues to pose new moral, legal, and social challenges. So it has, for example, given us the concept of brain death as a technologically enabled physiological state that societies, our psychology, our law and ethics have had to respond to. So close my parenthesis on the tech bubble and return to the tech bubble of the late 90s and early 2000s when I was a young lawyer working in international trade law. And I was looking at how international trade rules apply to e-commerce. This was the big new thing, as well as how to deal with intellectual property laws in a world of digitized content and of music, movies, and other things streaming across borders. So much was changing. And as I was working with other young lawyers in the government context, and another young lawyer my age, one of my good friends at the office, who I didn't know at the time, but came to learn had been born with a congenital heart defect. And in the particular summer that I'm telling you about, had his health was starting to decline. He didn't tell many of us much about this, so we didn't actually realize how serious it all was. He was quite private about it. But there was one day at work where I was heading into the elevator, and just coming out of the elevator, I met Mike, who collapsed in front of me, just inches from my feet. And I don't remember clearly now, this being 20 years ago, but I do remember this moment of panic as me and this other person who was in the elevator flurried around trying to respond. And while the person in the elevator, fortunately, understood CPR and got started on that, I flurried around to find a phone, to get 911, to figure out information about Mike's family and medical team. And unfortunately, Mike died. And he was a wonderful friend to all of us, a hilarious and generous young man, someone who now 20 years later remains a shared bond that my friends from that time, when we get together for a drink or whatever, will always remember and bring up. And I think this started my direct interest in and exposure to the issues of organ donation, as I came to learn that the question of heart transplant was very much on the table that summer. And things were moving in that direction for Mike, although not quickly enough, as it turns out. So this left me over the subsequent months and years thinking, could Mike have been saved? What underlies the social consensus that makes organ donation and transplantation possible? How can it be made stronger and more effective? Are there, and on the other side, are there downsides to organ donation and transplantation in the pursuit of expanding ODT? Are there moral tensions that we look away from, that we prefer not to see and prefer not to face head on? So several years later, I'm sorry, my voice is getting worse as I continue, but anyway, several years later, let me try a sip of hot tea here. Having completed graduate studies in law and having begun as a new law professor here in Ottawa, I returned to the topic. And I started the first publication I had looking at the ethics and law of issues relating to organ donation was provoked by a story I'd come across of a family whose child had received a life-saving transplant, but who stated quite clearly and in public in the media that they would never donate any of their own organs posthumously on the basis of their religious beliefs. And I remember at the time feeling troubled and confused by this position. And it started me on a path of thinking about what underlay a position of this type, how we should respond to it as a matter of sort of social policy. And I came across this idea of the so-called priority or reciprocity system. And this is, in essence, a policy in which a person who registers to donate posthumously, if it turns out they require a transplant during their life, would receive preferential access over someone who had not registered. And I thought to myself, is this a moral and appropriate response to a situation of this type? And at the time, only Singapore had a system like this. Israel subsequently adopted one. And I did my first sabbatical in Singapore, looking at the media around the change and thinking about what were the characteristics of a society in which a policy of this type came to be adopted. And in addition to the legal and human rights analysis I did and published on this potential policy, I decided to embark on my first piece of qualitative social science research, interviewing focus groups of Canadians to see what they would think about this kind of thing. And this got me started as a lawyer. It's not typical to do work of this type. And I partnered with social scientists who knew how to do this work. And this got me started on this fascinating method, which I've been drawn to repeatedly over the years on complex questions of contested value and moral and political philosophy in a whole range of domains. And I've invariably been shown, to my surprise, that my sense of how people think is often wrong. And this is great in my view. Who does not like being surprised and learning something new? So it's been, to a curious person, a phenomenal method to gain insight into the potential blind spots I might have in terms of my own thinking through of these kinds of questions. So on this particular topic, prior surveys had shown that people were split evenly on whether this was a good thing. And my interviews showed me that, in fact, it's no great surprise that you got about 50% support for this, because in fact, people are not neutral. They feel strongly about a policy of this type, but they adopt one of three different moral principles, each of which points in a different direction, one of which is the golden rule. This is a long-standing rule of ethics reflected in all major religions and societies, that you do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which would suggest that those unwilling to donate ought not to take from the common pool. And yet others would say, actually, no, we should adopt policies that encourage donation. What matters is the outcome. This is a consequentialist philosophy. And the third one expressed is the idea that it's illegitimate to allocate life-saving organs on the basis of social worth, and to punish those who we perceive as free riders is, in essence, an allocation on the basis of social worth, when in fact medical prognosis should guide who, medical need and prognosis should guide who gets the organ. So in essence, you see this clash of these principles, which underlay this otherwise indeterminate social position. So since then, let me sort of move forward from that. I've worked on many issues where ethics law and ODT, organ donation and translation, intersect. For example, I'm currently working on the issue of whether 6-month abstinence from alcohol prior to liver transplant waitlisting is legal. Another issue, what types of interventions can be performed on people before they die while they're still alive and we owe them duties befitting someone with moral and legal personhood. What can we do to them in order to allow for successful donation and transplantation after their death? This is not an obvious question. Another question, and linking to what Teneille just spoke about, how long should we wait after somebody's heart stops and we declare them dead before we may remove organs for transplantation? And this is work I was privileged to participate in, led by Sunny Janani, leading to sort of evidence that supported the current 5-minute rule of waiting to ensure a lack of auto-resuscitation, for example. But a question I would pose is, true, 5 minutes, we've learned this is perhaps the time we should wait, but there's still damage to recipients during this time from anoxic organ damage. What if a donor herself gave permission to shorten that time? Can a person consent to such a thing? In Canada, we have, we allow people to consent to medical aid in dying. Is there a reason why we wouldn't allow consent to a shorter period of waiting for someone who really does want to enable successful transplant? So I have 1 minute left, and I have one last point on which I want to bring this to close, and that is another issue this very week that came to me was the case of a person who is listed for lung transplant who is refusing COVID vaccine, contrary to the mandatory vaccine applied by the transplant program, and is proposing to challenge this in court. And so this brings the focus, into stark focus, I think, the underlying tension between individual and collective rights and interests, and in particular, the issue of social solidarity that underlies organ donation, which is par excellence an expression of social solidarity, but also response to public health crisis, which is a moment calling for social solidarity. And apart from protecting oneself, given one will be immunosuppressed post-transplant, there's the disease transmission risk, but also protecting ICU resources for the whole host of other people who might need treatment, including potentially other transplant recipients awaiting their transplant. So it seems that there's a lot supporting the imposition of this mandate, but if we recognize that we're not forcing people who cannot get vaccinated to be vaccinated prior to transplant, is it fair for us to force someone who's refusing for some other reason? How do we distinguish these cases? And is what we are expressing here when we demand that such a person be vaccinated pre-transplant, in essence, a form of moral judgment expressing our dissatisfaction with the failure to make this gesture of social solidarity in a context where taking an organ is itself a benefit from, and a clear benefit from, social solidarity expressed by others. So let me close with that and say that in a way I return with this topic to the topic where I started. These questions around social solidarity and what we owe to each other, what we can expect from each other, and also point out that it's not so simple, because we who are privileged and get the benefits of social solidarity can't assume that those not in the club feel or benefit from that same social solidarity. So this bigger context, I think, has to be borne in mind before the rush to a moral judgment of those who don't appear to abide by the social solidarity rules that underlie all of these systems is made too quickly. Thanks.
Wow, thank you very much, Jennifer. Such a wonderful presentation, and it caused a lot of discussion in the chat box here. So that's great. And I will move forward and we can go back to discussions later on. And I will introduce our next speaker, who is Linda Powell. And Linda's initial career started as a physiotherapist, graduating from McGill University. Her career path led to a 25-year involvement with the development of STARS Air Ambulance in Western Canada. Community engaged has included governance on charitable boards, and she holds the director certification from the Institute of Corporate Directors. She retired from her management role with STARS with the start of her caregiver journey for a family member who faced rapidly evolving end-stage liver disease. Linda is a patient family partner, participant in the International Donation and Transplantation Legislative and Policy Forum, and is currently the chair of Alberta Organization Group, a community collaborative to advocate for organ donation in Alberta. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that kind introduction. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm personally participating from the beautiful traditional meeting place and home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Piikani, Kainai, Siksika Nations, and the people of Treaty 7 in Southern Alberta, which also includes Tsina and Stoney Nakoda First Nations. And of course, Southern Alberta is the home of the Métis Nation as well in Region 3. So I'm going to speak today from the perspective of a volunteer in the organ donation advocacy sphere, different than the other speakers, and with lived experience as a caregiver, as Vanessa mentioned, of a waitlisted transplant patient, my husband, Greg, who is on the line joining the Women in Donation session. For my background, I retired, as Vanessa said, many years ago as a physiotherapist, and then worked for a long time in critical care and emergency air medical transport. So do have a medical background and understanding of some of the issues in depth. Thank you for this opportunity to share how I became involved and reflect on the challenges. As we all know, first of all, it's important to have the patient and family perspective in medical care and in research. And this is an involvement and perspective we need to continually emphasize and conscientiously maintain. That impact of the mantra of nothing about me without me is increasing and certainly gaining more profile. And over this ever lengthening period of COVID, some of it was cold, Jennifer, I'm with you. Some of this interaction may likely have decreased due to the obvious, stress, time constraints, no longer face-to-face engagement, possibly fund availability, and certainly some research resources pivoted so rapidly towards COVID over the past 22, 23 months now. As context to my role as a caregiver to a waitlisted patient and as an advocate for organ donation, I'd like to share a bit of our story in capsulized form with a full concurrence from Greg, so no privacy issues, so our patient. So we go back 35 years, a factor 9 infusion for a hemophilia B bleed. Fortunately, no transmission of HIV. But in 2011, Hep C showed its ugly head, having been quiet until then. Interferon treatment failed, and 10 years later, treatment with a protease inhibitor was started. And unfortunately, we were into full-on liver failure in 9 days. Then waitlisting on a liver transplant list for 2 years, told to leave our province, and in fact, the country. So off to the US, which was no insignificant feat, leaving behind 3 adult children who were hoping that their dad would come home. And fortuitously, angels on Greg's shoulders, and he was offered a spot in a phase 2B drug trial with one of the polymerase inhibitors. And this drug, a precursor to the drugs now used to cure Hep C, worked its magic. In fact, one day he says he remembers putting his foot on the floor, getting up in the morning and saying, I think I'm cured. Transplant was not required, but F4 cirrhosis, episode of liver cancer, recent liver failure episode again, but we're now back on track. But a key highlight of this is research has directly worked to save a life. Research works. And there are 2 points I'd like to bring forward today based on this lived experience and why we got involved, why I got involved, and now our community engagement and organ donation advocacy. So firstly, economics of organ donation as part of advocacy. With our family story, both I and Greg have been advocating for advancements in our organ donation system here in Alberta for the past 5 years. Nothing like personal experience, of course, as we all have said, to engender passion and purpose. We are part of a community collaborative, the Alberta Organization Group, which I chair now, striving to mobilize the health system, government, and community in making a difference to advance the organ donation rate here. And it's complex. This group came together as community and advocacy volunteers, business, legal, medical professionals, all with a personal connection and interest in organ donation to delve into how our system works, what doesn't work, how we can help improve the donation rate. One of the lowest in our country, and comparatively, of course, then low to higher performing jurisdictions and countries. And waiting lists now have been growing. As we all know, political and medical systems move slowly. And although COVID response has certainly shown the world that systems can pivot quickly when the stakes are so high. And with organ donation and transplant, the stakes are so high. Partnerships with the medical community, government, and philanthropic community are cornerstones, but the challenge is to have all of those pieces moving together and vectored in the same direction with action, not just words. So the AOG, the Alberta Organization Group, developed a patient outcome and economic impact model to support the argument that investment in organ donation is an economic and financial benefit, in addition to the obvious and strong patient benefits. And very briefly, and this is continually an evolution, depending on input variables and our assumptions and the rate of increase of deceased donation, we were able to demonstrate a range of full cash recovery to a potential endpoint of a socio-economic benefit of approximately $1 billion over 10 years Again, this is just deceased donation. To our knowledge, there are not many treatments that demonstrate such a cost recovery profile, yet change does not happen based on economics alone. There's so many other components. So I'm going to put it out there. We welcome input from others who have done similar work and how you may have tied the economic case to the patient outcome case to help move the bar. Secondly, the area of transplant patient caregiver support. This is definitely a significant component of the cost, impact, and economics of donation and transplant, and an area under-resourced and actually not sufficiently addressed in many aspects: financial, emotional, psychological, health, social. Recently, the CDTRP organized a team of patient, family, and donor partners to develop the program for their annual Patient Family Donor Research Forum, held virtually again this past year in November. I was fortunate to be involved with this fantastic undertaking. One of the areas identified by our planning committee was the research gap related to caregiver support, the actual support and resources available or lack thereof, and the incredible cost to our economy when working individuals transition to the role of caregiver. One presenter, Dr. Janet Fast from U of A, University of Alberta, PhD in Family and Consumer Economics, presented the economic burden on our own province alone with overall caregiving. That's all caregiving, all ages, all diseases, all issues. It is astronomical. The value of caregiver time in Alberta alone in 2018 was $11.5 billion. We don't know the specific economic impact from transplant caregivers and families, but obviously a portion of this is related to donation and transplant. So it's important to involve caregivers and families in these research endeavors. However, it's difficult to recruit us for many reasons: time, stress, fatigue, burnout, financial challenges, etc. So how do we engage caregivers in caregiver and patient care and other areas of research? So interestingly, Miles Leslie, the Department of Community Health Sciences and School of Public Policy, Cummings School of Medicine here at UC, presented an open access paper a few months ago at the Alberta Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research Support Unit Journal Club, entitled Recruitment of Caregivers into Health Services Research, Lessons from a User-Centered Design Study. And in the article, he outlined the challenges of actually recruiting family caregivers in co-designed research. So perhaps we need to develop innovative ways to engage caregivers and family. And certainly the technology tools that have fortuitously exploded over the past 22 months with the pandemic to support communications could help. This is a huge area when considering this not well-researched impact of the lead up to transplant and post-transplant on families. So in summary, a few things to think about, and thank you for the opportunity to present how I got involved with donation and the opportunities and some of the gaps that perhaps we could address. Briefly, thoughts about economics and advocacy for organ donation are on the table, and the specific economic impact from transplant patient caregiving. Lots of questions, always more questions than answers. How can we best advocate for policy change and resources in our own local jurisdictions? What are the factors that are key to success? Because we have seen ourselves in the work that we have done, the economic argument does not stand alone. It does not move the bar alone. How can we further the research on the impact on caregivers and the caregiver impact on the economy? And how can we influence policy to provide support as part of the patient team? So some things to think about, and thanks so much for the opportunity to bring these forward, and really looking forward to the discussion after everyone has spoken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Great presentation. We love to hear your involvement with research and everything that you've accomplished. So thank you very much for, and always with CDTRP supporting the development of the patient donation forum and everything. Thank you very much. And I'll introduce now the next speaker, for the interest of time, and then we'll have some time for discussion in the end, okay? And I'm a bit biased to introduce the next speaker because she was my master's degree supervisor in Brazil. But here it goes. Professor Bartira Roza is an associate professor at the School of Nursing at Federal University of São Paulo, Unifesp. Dr. Roza completed her master and doctoral degrees at nursing school, Federal University of São Paulo, with emphasis in organ donation research, investigating family refusal reasons in Brazilian organ donation organizations. She's the leader of the study group in organ and tissue donation and transplantation, GDOT, and she's currently the associate editor of the Acta Paulista of Enfermagem journal and a member of the Brazilian Association of Organ Transplants, Department of Transplant Coordination, and an active member of the International Transplant Nurses Society. And if my accent hasn't shown before, now it's totally here. Please join me in welcoming Bartira Roza. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, presenting a bit about my background in organ donation research. This is the overview of my presentation, and I will walk you through my clinical experience, academic experience, mentorship development, and the success and challenges. I graduated from nursing school at the Federal University of São Paulo in 1996. The following year, I was accepted in a fellowship program and the surgical nursing at the same university. In 1997, the transplant legislation in Brazil passed, and the first organ procurement organizations opened in São Paulo. At the time, I was finishing my fellowship program and applied to one of the donor coordinator positions and worked for 3 years in that field. In 2000, I was hired at one of the largest private hospitals in Latin America, the Albert Einstein Hospital, to support the implementation of shared governance and primary care nursing, as well as assisting with the Joint Commission accreditation process implementation. It's a good time for me. I worked for 12 years in that institution, and among the projects I led, the most important one was the implementation of the organ donation and transplantation program at the Israelita Hospital Albert Einstein. I have been always involved in organ donation and transplantation research and lead studies at the Albert Einstein Hospital, but also created with Professor Janine Schirmer, the first research group in organ donation and transplantation in 2009, which is called GDOT. Also, I loved working in the clinical field, and I knew I needed a shift in my career in order to be able to achieve the necessary autonomy to lead and be the face of our projects and to share the knowledge I had acquired over the years in my career. Therefore, in 2010, I was appointed as assistant professor at the Federal University of São Paulo, where I further developed my research program investigation, organ donation and system in Brazil. There was a lack of opportunities for education and new organ donation coordinators and transplant coordinators, along with the need to promote education of healthcare professionals in the bedside to support donation process. Thus, I helped Professor Janine Schirmer, former Dean of the School of Nursing at the Federal University of São Paulo, to develop a certification course in donation and transplantation. The certification course formed over 100 students over the course of 6 years. And in 2010, we launched a residence program or fellowship program to novel nurses and allied health to specialize in donation and transplantation. As you can see, students have the opportunity to participate in the clinical rounds with nurses, with nursing professors, clinicians, and transplant surgeons weekly. Students are encouraged to submit abstracts and attend national and international conferences. And in the second year of the program, they have the opportunity to participate in a short-term internship to visit different countries to learn about other donation and transplantation programs. So far, we had students visiting Portugal, UK, Spain, Madrid, and US. We had a solid partnership with the George Washington University with the support of Professor Linda Oller. Apart from the mentorship work, I have also developed multiple research projects. In my current work in this founded research, in which we are developing a smart package for organ transplantation in partnership with various engineers and healthcare professionals from these institutions listed here. And I am also the lead of the National Biovigilance System Implementation Project, which is a 2 million reais project aimed to developing a real-time biovigilance system to support tracking adverse events and the near misses in organ donation transplantation programs nationally. Finally, I had many challenges being a woman in donation, but fortunately, way more successes. Among the challenges I faced was the lack of knowledge of donor families and healthcare professionals about the concept of brain death, more especially about brain death diagnosis. In all my clinical roles for multiple times, I read development programs had ideas, but never had the opportunity to present those myself, and those were generally present by men who looked at the credit for it. In addition, I had to constantly prove myself as knowledgeable and capable of developing the tasks I have been doing for years. It were quite infuriating and frustrating. However, I found a way out of that challenging cycle of a role where I can make a difference to the future generation ahead. As an associate professor of the Federal University of São Paulo, I have finally been recognized for my value. And I now advocate to empower all the nurses and the women to be strong and heard. In Brazil, there is a bad culture of disrespect and low recognition for the nurses professional, and I fight to change that daily. Among the things I have done to achieve that goal are getting funders for organ donation research fellowships, and the sharing my findings in the more than 90 papers and chapters that I have writing so far. Lastly, the development of the solid education program at the Federal University of São Paulo is enabling me to empower healthcare professionals, especially women, to pursue a career and to change the sexist scenario in donation system that has been in place for so many years. I would like to thank you, the organization committee, for the space to talk today, and also all the organization listed in this slide. Thank you so very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bartira. Very powerful presentation. And we're gonna have some discussion later on, but we have our last presenter, and I'm getting flashbacks because I introduced her at the Quebec Forum. So I'm happy to introduce again Dr. Claire Williment, who was appointed as the head of transplant development and NHS blood and transplant in 2013, with responsibility for developing and implementing strategies for increasing the number and quality of organs for transplant, both nationally and internationally. In 2017, she was appointed as the accountable executive for opt-out legislation implementation to oversee the development and delivery of plans to implement the changes in 6 different UK countries regarding consent for organ and tissue donation. In 2020, she was appointed as the accountable executive for the organ utilization program, leading a portfolio of activities aimed to maximize the potential for organ transplantation in the UK. She is also the secretary to the organ utilization group, responsible for making recommendations for improving the UK transplant services. Prior to joining NHSBT, Claire worked in the Department of Health, where she was a senior policy lead with organ donation, respiratory disease, and pathology services within her portfolio. She also spent several years working in health ministers' offices. Welcome, Claire. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that very kind invitation to come and speak. I have got slides. I'm going to try very hard to share them on the screen. Can you see those?
It's coming on. Yep.
Brilliant. If I press present, will that break the system, or is it still working?
Still working. All good.
Thank you. So my name is Claire Williment. I work in the UK in NHS blood and transplant, and it's difficult to tell on this small screen, but I'm probably not much bigger than I appear on your screen. I was called a hobbit only yesterday, and my journey in donation has been both unexpected and also quite circular, so I thought I'd talk you through it. I'll give you a bit of a disclosure at the start. So I've got very basic GCSE science, so that's the sort of at secondary school level. I've got A-levels in English, art and geography and psychology. My degree, I majored in English literature with a minor in revolution and enlightenment. I went to Middlesex University. So I have no real understanding about science, biology, chemistry. I just scraped by a passing grade. But I found through my career, and I'll be giving you top tips as I go along, I've found I don't need to understand anything about biology or chemistry. I just need to say the right words. So I worked on CJD policy, which is the human form of mad cow disease, back in the Department of Health. I still don't understand very much about it, but I know that everybody that got it was methionine homozygous at codon 129 of the human genome, and I know the circumstances in which I have to say those words. No idea what they mean still, but everybody nods knowingly when I say it at the right time. My A-levels, again, strikingly lacking anything to do with organ donation or transplantation, but it taught me how to draft and how to critique and how to motivate others as well through the psychology side of it, and how to draw very good doodles in my notebook when I'm bored in meetings. My degrees taught me how to read and critique and draft at speed, do it faster, and also how to bring about revolution and enlightenment. And I wanted to, I did my dissertation in Angela Carter's magical realism and fairy tales, and that's very actually quite relevant to organ donation. There's a lot about how to understand and then debunk the myths that surround organ donation. My ambition was to be an English teacher, but it didn't work out. So my first steps in organ donation were when I looked like this, when I was probably about 8 or 9. And it was inspired by this little boy, Ben Hardwick, who was in need of a liver transplant, and there was a campaign on TV He ended up being Britain's youngest ever liver transplant recipient at that time. He tragically died. He did get a transplant, but it was too little too late. He died when he was only 3, but I remember very vividly throwing a temper tantrum, insisting my parents donate my liver to save Ben and that I would be absolutely fine. So that was my first foray into organ donation. And then I didn't really do much about it at all. My wandering years. I worked in a nursery. My mother owned a children's daycare nursery. There it is at the top. And after university, during university, I did waitressing. I worked as a silver service waitress, so worked at the finest banquets across London in the some of the finest settings. I've served royalty and nobles and lords and everybody in between. Some people might recognise this man, Professor Chris Rudge, who's one of the founding fathers of the organ donation and transplantation service within the UK. I met him during my silver service waitressing days. So what did it teach me? Not much about organ donation still, but it taught me how to manage people who are childish, and that happens quite a lot, I'm sorry to say, amongst some of my colleagues, and there's more than a few that understand when I give them the stern look, they have to go on this naughty seat, and that doesn't matter what age they are or what level of professorship they have. It taught me how to negotiate. And it gave me a complete loss of any deference for anybody. Everybody looks exactly the same as they're being ill on the pavement outside after a big party. But I got bored of waitressing and I moved on. So I got a job in government. I started off in finance, then worked, as I just talked about, on CJD and BSc inquiries and social care and emergency preparedness. Now that came in very handy over the last 2 years. And I worked in the ministerial office. And then I moved into organ donation and transplantation and moved on to respiratory disease, pathology, allergies. In my first round in organ donation, I actually established NHS Blood and Transplant. I wrote the law that established the organisation that I now work for. I would have done it differently if I'd realised I was working here, going to end up working here. But I did those few and on a bit of a circular basis. I went back to them round and round again, probably 2 or 3 times each, as different issues came up. And I did something slightly different on each of the rounds for organ donation. So I was involved in the original organ donation task force, which revolutionised donor rates in the UK. I was involved in the looking at whether or not we should have an opt-out system for organ donation. That was 2009. I was involved in non-heart beating donation back in the very early days, and the legal guidance around it. That's what's now DCD donation, and doing reports around that. And it taught me how to draft policies and documents and legislation, how to work with stakeholders to make sure that the policies you're writing are fit for purpose, and what motivates people and what are the particularly politicians. And my top tip, you never know who you will bump into again, because who should I have ended up working for in the Department of Health but Chris Rudge, who I've been recognised from my silver service days. I got bored of the Department of Health. I got fed up with working for government, so I jumped ship and went over to work for NHS Blood and Transplant. I started off working with Beatrice Dominguez-Gale over in Spain, actually on an EU joint action as a workstream lead. I did the strategy development work in the first stages, so the 2020 strategies for organ donation and organ utilisation. I became head of transplant development and established a more rigorous process for oversight of research and innovation, led a clinical support services team. I then moved back into opt-out legislation. So having left government because I hated working with ministers and I didn't really like doing the legislation, I found myself back in Parliament working for ministers and writing more legislation. So I was very closely involved in the UK's opt-out legislation. Still am working on that. We're still doing it in Northern Ireland. I'm now working back on organ utilisation and the secretary for the organ utilisation group, which is the second stage of the organ donation task force that I was involved in back in 2008. So once again, the circle continues. It is a glorious circle of life. I've had a lot of support along the way, and I've been very, very privileged by having actually very few bad bosses that I've needed to run away from, and just surrounded by really fantastic people that have done nothing but support me. and I've done everything I can to learn from them and be more like them. Well, the good ones, that is. Just one call out that I'd like to make is Sally Johnson, who was the director for organ donation and transplantation. She was the one that saved me from the Department of Health and brought me into NHS Blood and Transplant. And one of the things that I will never forget is during the opt-out legislation, we were called into number 10 Downing Street to go and meet the Prime Minister. And we were ushered into a room. There were 5 seats, 2 of us, me and Sally, and 3 others, the Prime Minister and 2 of his aides. And we had to wait for the Prime Minister. We were told to take a seat. And I went and sat over to one side, whereas Sally sat at the head of the table, and meaning that the Prime Minister and his aides had to go and sit alongside her. And I just thought that that was a genius stroke that I wish that I'd both thought of and had the nerve to do, but I will, should I ever end up there again. I've had some challenges along the way. So I am a woman, I am short, I'm only hobbit size, and I got quite far quite quickly in my career. So I was quite young when I became a reasonably senior person within the field. I'm a working mother of a child with special needs, special educational needs, who is very, very sporty. So I have to balance, like everybody else, caring for my child and supporting him through all his sporting things, as well as working. I have no scientific nursing or medical background whatsoever. I feel constantly like like an interloper, and I don't have that common shared experience that nearly everybody else that I work with does. And it's worse because I was a civil servant, so I'm actually really evil, uncaring, soulless, and a government spy, is how I'm quite often perceived. And I don't mind though, because I have a big sense of humour, so I just laugh it off. And I'm a collaborator, not a dictator. So it's a challenge if you want to take everybody with you and be everybody's friend, rather than sometimes you just have to tell people what to do and tell them to get on with it. So another top tip, you can't have it all. You have to strike a balance, you have to prioritise. And my real top tip is I have a single diary and everything goes into that diary. Everybody can see everything to do with work, to do with school, to do with social events. Everyone can view it. And as a rule, that really helps in letting people know that if I've got a parent-teacher evening or if Oliver's got a rugby match, then I'm not going to be free and available for a meeting. Just a cautionary tale. So bearing those challenges in mind, in the Department of Health, I headed up a team of exclusively white, upper middle class, older middle-aged men in suits. I headed up that team. We were organising this big conference, and there was a meal the night before and then the working meeting the following day. All meeting delegates assumed I was the PA to the oldest man. Actually, he was my PA. And it worked out quite well for me that evening. People bought me drinks all night. I had a whale of a time, brilliant conversations. People were very, very open and honest with me and very unguarded in their comments. Whereas my PA spent the whole night being lobbied and complained to over the other side of the room. And then it was brilliant the following day, the look of confusion and horror on everyone's face when I went and sat at the head of the table and started chairing the meeting, and they realised that maybe they shouldn't have been quite so honest with me the night before. So I did during that evening, when I felt people really were going too far, point out that, do you know who I am? And you might not want to say these things to me. But I do try to call people out for their prejudice as well. So I was at a meeting a while back, and it was me and a group of, peer to peer, but all men, and no one turned up to take the notes. So they said, Claire, are you okay to take the notes? And I just said, just so that we're clear, are you asking me because I'm a woman, or because I'm the youngest, or because I'm the only one that's not a surgeon? To be fair to them, it turned out I was the only one that had brought a pen. So I was fine. I just handed my pen over to somebody else and he took the notes. So in terms of what inspires me and what motivates me, first of all, my team. There we are with our Christmas finery on. I have a fantastic team around me, and they work so hard, and they are so motivated and rise to any challenge that has been thrown to us over the last decade, and there has been more than enough in the last 2 years to last a lifetime, really, I feel. So they are amazing. My son is another complete inspiration and motivation. If he can overcome everything that he's managed to do, then I can certainly follow his example. And there I am screaming at the top of my voice as he goes off and scores a try at rugby at the weekend. running alongside him. But really, this is what motivates me. So Kiera Ball is the little girl on the left who tragically died, and her heart was donated to save the life of Max Johnson, who's the little boy on the right. Sorry, Kiera's on the left, Max is on the right. And in England, the opt-out legislation is called Max and Kiera's Law in their honour and in recognition of everything that they've done. So they inspire, it's the donors and the families that inspire me and the transplant patients that inspire me every day. And I feel very privileged to be working in such a fascinating and moving policy area. So that's my story. Thank you very much for listening. I shall try and stop sharing.
Wow, amazing presentation, Kiera. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here today and be able to hear such wonderful stories and how all your careers have developed so far. I'll pass the word to Lori and thank you very much, you all, and we'll keep the discussions going.
What wonderful. What I have to unilaterally declare that our Women in Donation WIT event is just amazing. And I'm going to ask Roz Manin, who is the WIT chair and who has been in attendance the whole from the beginning to this afternoon, to just maybe make a few comments. Now we have a masquerade going on between Beth Foster, who's masquerading as Roz, and Roz, who is actually Roz. So let's see if you can unmute and turn your camera on, if that will work.
I will try. Can you
There she
hear
is.
me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hey, everybody. Greetings from Omaha, Nebraska, and we're still waiting for our first snowfall, Lori. So some of us are disappointed, and others remembered when it was -25 for the whole winter. So I want to thank everyone for their wonderful presentations. I don't know most of you, although I have been involved with the CDTRP in the past. I don't really know where to begin, but I have to say that I find that women often take the biggest challenges on, because I don't think any of you, the projects, the areas you're working on are very difficult, whether it's legal, ethical, moral, mental, the emotional bonds of these families. It's really inspiring for me to hear this, to hear about the struggles in another country, and to understand, you know, it's not like my career was a snap either, but I certainly feel privileged at times when I hear these presentations. What a great community. So I look forward and hope that we can continue to work together. And I appreciate Lori, your work, and Vanessa, your work in getting this all organized tonight. So thank you. Or this afternoon, or maybe it's very late where you are.
I suspect it's late, especially for Claire, who is probably the latest.
I can't stay up that late. I'll be asleep in about 2 hours.
It's coming up to midnight now.
Oh,
it's all right. It's all right.
Well, so we've got, oh, it's nearly midnight. Oh my goodness. And yes, this is the other Claire in Ireland. So it's nearly midnight there. So I'm going to thank you so much, Roz and Beth, our chair and current co-chair of WIT, for joining. Beth, did you want to add anything, or can you not because you're masquerading as Roz?
I think I can.
Oh, there you are.
And someone even changed my name for me. I don't know how they did that. I should probably know that by now, 2 years in, but anyway. No, I don't really have much to add. It was really awesome and inspiring to hear all of those really fascinating presentations about journeys in donation from so many different angles. It kind of makes me want to change careers, I have to say. Yeah, it was incredible. Thank you so much.
So Vanessa, back to you. We've got time. We can stay on longer if we want to, but we've currently got 10-15 minutes or so for questions and comments.
Yeah, I got some questions here in the chat box, and you guys are welcome to, you know, open your cameras and unmute yourselves and ask questions as well. There was one question for Dr. Goffton that I'm not sure if it was Beth or Ross now last, but it was describing that it was such an interesting study. And she would love to hear how you managed to put together this team so early in your career. And that's a really nice question that will help us, novel researchers and in academic positions, to set up our teams for sure.
So it was step by step, to be honest. It first started with people taking chances on me. That's why I was alluding to it. So, I mean, Sunny Donani had his deep heart project that was ongoing at the time. And I was my first year in my career, and my mentor had moved away to another hospital, and the project for our site was kind of left with me, and I could either take it or leave it. And so I decided to take it and go with it. And at that point, you know, I think they were taking a big chance with me as an unknown. And later on, I mean, I think I met Jennifer through that project, and I don't even remember where we actually started working together on our new part project. But as I met people from other work I'd been doing that I really enjoyed from the different disciplines, we just came together through talking about the project. And I think we predated the pandemic with Zooming. That's how we ended up bringing the team together. I learned about Zoom from Jennifer Chandler. Murat said, "Hey, Jennifer's using this crazy new software." And we were like, "Oh, good. We don't have to be in the same city to do meetings." So we ended up being able to bring together a multidisciplinary kind of group from different places just by meeting regularly and starting to talk about similar themes. So yeah, it just kind of came together serendipitously over time.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, I'm also Sunny's mentee for I don't know how many years now, and he's incredible in putting teams together and in supporting women in research and organ donation research. So that's lovely to hear. And there's a comment here, it's a question, and Jen already had an answer in the chat box, which was asking about any research into women's registered consent decisions being overturned. And in her experience, so this was Kelly asking, and in her experience as a coordinator, it's been easier for families to say no to mom's wishes than dad's. And then Jen just responded, and if you want to open your mic, Jen, and expand on this, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, sure, certainly. This topic of the so-called family veto or family override is something, there's been some discussion in the Canadian context about that, and whether what it wouldn't, some academic lawyers say it's illegal to do so. I think it's more complicated than that. And so I have a student looking into this as a topic to try to get to the bottom of, because I know that it's kind of a continuing difficulty facing practitioners. And Kelly's observation, I think, is super interesting. I don't know of any research of that type, but it would be really valuable to me in figuring out the legality if we could document that certain people's wishes get overridden more than others.
Thanks, Jen.
I think we used to have I just remember a time when I remember one of the CDTRP meetings a few years ago where Sam Shemy was talking about something that is illegal in Canada. And to stress his point, he said, "This is currently illegal in Canada. This is currently illegal in Canada." And he said it like 3 or 4 times just to make sure we were all paying attention. But when I've considered hearing about the legalities of family veto and the work that was done by some of the CDT, I think it was Megan Taves, as well as I think maybe you, Jennifer, and maybe Tim Caulfield, looking at the actual legal framework of consent and across the whole country of Canada, and the legalities seem not to match the practice that's there in every province. And so surely that then does bring up these interesting points about legality or not, doesn't it?
Yeah, to me, it's pretty complicated, because just because someone's consent gives legal authority to take an organ doesn't mean that if someone does not take an organ, they've done something illegal. And so I've always been uncomfortable with the idea that family veto is illegal. It doesn't really make sense to me as a lawyer what that means. But we're working on this to try to kind of get to the bottom of it a little bit.
And Kelly has a question.
I just wanted to say thank you for kind of addressing what I brought up in the chat, and that it was a observation that I came up with over many years as an organ and tissue donation coordinator. And as we were talking, I hadn't thought about it in the perspective as women in transplant or donation. And then it's all the experiences started coming back to me, and I was like, oh, wow, it's much easier. I could think of at least 5 or 6 incidences where people overturned their mom's registered consent decision, but I could think of as many that they didn't overturn when they didn't want to, and it was their dads. So I find that part of the dynamic very interesting, and I'd love to be part of moving forward and trying to figure out where all of that comes from.
Kelly, that's amazing. And I just have a comment for you. I'm currently leading a working group within CDTRP, which is supporting research from the clinical perspective and connecting clinical people with researchers within the network to develop this type of research. So that's an absolutely great question. And I just asked Katie to post the link to the working groups here. Please feel free to contact us and join our group. It's free. We meet once a month. And it's also a way to empower women in donation and transplantation research. So thank you for your comment and for sharing your experiences. Also, I wanted to ask Linda, Bartira, about their challenges. Like you kind of touched a bit on the challenges you had throughout your careers and throughout your life lived experiences. But were there any other challenges you had related to gender differences and sexism and things like that that you'd like to share with us?
I can say something, Linda. That's an interesting question. I think my white hair puts me in the age group where over the years that I think gentle transition, it hasn't fully got there yet, of it's a man's world existed many years ago, and it's been slowly evolving over time. When I started a career in physiotherapy, there were no men in the classes. We were all women, and that's starting to change now. We see that in nursing, but certainly when I was a practicing physiotherapist, it was all women. And getting into the world we're in now with donation and advocacy, I think there's more of an acceptance of equal participation, although sometimes there's dynamics where you see that older dynamic happening, but generally speaking, it's improved. Now it may be different in other cultures, other countries. You know, there's lots of aspects to this, but I do think we're moving towards a more comfortable place for women than in the past in some areas. I mean, certainly what we see going on in the world is another story with some of the incredible political and religious and economic issues that are going on. But from what we're dealing with in our own world, I think we're starting to see more of an equality. That's just a personal opinion. I feel that. I'm hoping that's what other people are feeling.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks. Bartira, any comments on how things have changed? When I worked in Brazil, it was really hard to work as an OTDC there, organ donation coordinator, for multiple reasons. The lack of knowledge, as you mentioned in your presentation, of healthcare professionals about the brain death diagnosis, and you have to explain, but make it appear like the other person was telling you that, so you could be included in the conversation. So it was really hard to balance the gender issues. in the workplace, and that definitely causes a lot of stress. And it was one of the reasons that I ended up being burned out as an OTDC, and I'm involved in researching this now. But do you have any other comments on how is that nowadays, if it's better, or how are you guys tackling this?
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. Step by step, no? We currently have a challenge to build an agenda with WIT Brazil, and with the support of all of us. I think we're past the romantic stage of Transplantation Brazil. And of course, my concern is to help our students build their career. It's very important. It's a way today. It's a way. It's just it.
Thank you. And also I wanted to ask Claire another question. Claire, do you have any tips on how to balance, work life? How do you do that? Like you share your personal life, that was amazing. And it's really hard as an early career investigator or professor to balance that. Like I currently have a 2.5-year-old downstairs with my husband, and I'm 5 months pregnant now. So I'm a bit concerned myself. So if you could share some of your experience, that would be amazing.
I think as time has gone on, I've got better at managing the work life. And I genuinely think that being post-COVID and as all being working a lot more from home has actually helped that, because I can start at 6 o'clock in the morning, then I can drop my kid off at school, I can go to a rugby match at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's all there in my diary. Everybody can see where I am and what I'm doing. I take my phone if need be. I'll be on the phone whilst screaming for him to go and run and take out another child even harder, and then be back in my dining room table and working again. So working from home has helped some of that balance, because I used to travel all the time, and you can't hit a balance if you are on a train traveling 4 days out of 5 to up and down the country, or up and on a plane around different countries. Where I think, and genuinely having everything in your diary, I found was a real turning point for me, because they can see I'm at the doctor's, or I'm at I'm at a rugby match, or I'm at a whatever, and they know where my hard lines are. But where I'm really struggling is social life in the mix. So I can handle kids, I can handle the child, and I can handle work, but getting a life outside of that is where I really struggle, and that's where I feel that I'm always a bit letting somebody down. There's no such thing as a right balance. You have to prioritize whatever makes it. It does get easier as they get older. They don't need you quite so much. And I remember, I'll share this story as well because it's painful for me. I was coming back from maternity leave, and I was going into a meeting with the minister, and I was really proud of myself. My child was a really impressive projectile vomiter, and I'd got out of the house with not being covered in sick, which was a first in about 6 months. And I was ready. I was in my suit, ready to go into the meeting with the minister, and I had my lines to take, and I headed off to the door, and they went, no, come back. I said, what's wrong? And I was so good, but I had this little yogurty handprint on my arse, where Oliver had obviously got me just before it was the only part of me that I couldn't see. So you just have to ride those things out, and it will pass over time. It does get easier as they get older, but you just have to be, you have to set your own priorities and tell everybody else what those are, and decide where your hard lines are, and that you don't care if you've got little yogurty handprints on your bottom. It doesn't stop your mind from working.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Could I just say, this has been, while people are putting up some more, and Melanie is pointing out, yes, we take people when they're pregnant, we pay ahead, kind of pay ahead and say, this is a good time. Patricia Gongol as well. I just want to say this, these have been such interesting conversations that we've had both in the context of CDTRP over the years and around the world with WIT over the years. I mean, the growing communities that can link through, well, let's face it, Zoom makes it a little bit easier in some ways for us all to link and have these really interesting, rich, kind of fulsome conversations about all these different aspects. I'd like to just thank also the men who joined us today, because sometimes it takes a bit of encouragement. We're happy you're here. All of you, please feel really warmly welcomed. And if any of you would like to contribute any thoughts, your thoughts are also very much welcomed. We can give you a minute to put your hands up if you like. I don't see too many.
Or we can put you on the spot. Yeah, there you go, Greg.
On the spot, Greg. There you go.
Well, anything I might say has some perspective. First of all, you all need to know that the woman in the room next to me is solid gold. I wouldn't certainly be on the planet without her. But the perspective I might share with you is that I believe that women are better leaders. I think they think things through well. I think they are better at making difficult judgments. And I think if they ran more things, our corporations would be better, and there'd be a lot less wars. That's just my thought. And when I bring any thoughts to the table, it was not a great experience, but certainly I saw the inside, up close and personal, 3 major donation programs, one in Jacksonville, Florida, one in Vancouver, British Columbia, and here in Alberta. And there were many contrasting variables. And then I probably carried 6 points of view. One of the physician, I'm an emergency physician, for those who are not aware. So I'm always watching out of the corner of my eye what's happening pathophysiologically to me and those around me. And of course, being the patient was a whole new experience of lying on the table and learning what went on in organ and transplant centers. So it gave me a wholesome view of the many gaps and opportunities that face us. And it's just wonderful to see all of you taking on these challenges, and particularly some of the more difficult ethical ones that we've spoken about. And Jennifer, thank you for your perspective on social solidarity. I hadn't really put it together in my head that way before, but it'll be fun to talk about it more someday. So thank you for the opportunity to say a couple of words.
Thank you very much, Greg. And I see Murat has his hand raised. Go ahead, Murat.
Thanks, Vanessa. All I have to say is I'm incredibly impressed by first of all, the turnout, by the stories shared today. When everybody was giving their presentations, I was reflecting on the fact that I wish my 2 girls were here today. They're out doing their activities, not rugby, but jiu-jitsu. So, and of course, the incredible mom is again backing up for me because I had to do this. I usually would be the one taking them to their activities tonight, but I think I'm incredibly impressed at the breadth of research being done, at the life stories that you all shared here today. I mean, I work closely with Teneille on the new part study, and I have no idea how we managed to get it to the stage where we're at, obviously with the help of amazing people that support us, our mentors, Jennifer, amongst them, the CDTRP, of course. But I can't imagine what it's like to do this on your own. And I wish only that we have more events like this. And I know this is a sort of a women in transplantation event and highlighting the incredible work that the women are doing in this field. But I took a lot of learning points for myself from this, because I'm an early career researcher as well. And it's incredible to hear. And I'm a parent, and my wife is working as well, and she's a professional. We all struggle with the same stories of yogurt hands and so on. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this. It's been an incredible experience.
Thank you, Marat. Thank you very much. Any other brave men want to share or want to comment?
Can I just say, I meant, thank you for the reminder, Marat, that the idea that Jen brought up of social solidarity, is that's what you called it? That's so interesting and so nuanced in different ways, isn't it? I mean, everything from the concept of organ donation and altruism to the other sides of that coin in terms of vaccines and so on. It's just incredibly complicated. And then you bring not only kind of ethical, not arguments necessarily, but discussions in, as well as legal ones, and it really it's fascinating, and especially as we find ourselves in this amazing place of a pandemic that really points it out, not just to our world of donation and transplantation, but to the world at large.
Can I also add, Lori? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take over, but I was texting with Kelly about this, and I was thinking, it would be great for CDTRP to encourage more events like this, maybe on more regular basis. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, I'm all for that. I think, we try, I mean, as I said at the beginning, the great thing about WIT as it grew was that it was kind of unharnessed in a way. We had a great.
We didn't have to answer to anybody, right? We set our own agenda. The TTS didn't tell us what to do. And we kind of make it up as we go along. When there's an unmet need that we think, we try to fill it. But I think certainly, you don't necessarily need WIT to get together and discuss, whether it's issues of professional development or academic development or your research. And in particular, I think donor research is really critical, and donor management research. And that's like a whole other topic I enjoy hearing about. But, we're happy to support in any way. I think in person it's more expensive, as Lori knows, but we've built a war chest over the last year and a half. So, and I'm really into going after companies and asking them, at some companies, these topics really resonate. I mean, they're very interested in career development, even for their own employees, and you're shocked. But Lori was around doing it before I was in the exec, so I'll shut up. But I'm gonna have to go, you guys, because somebody else is making dinner, as you could see, and I got 2 furry friends because my children are a little bit older now, but still demanding because they texted me about some crisis on Canvas, and my daughter's trying to get her finals in. So I have to go and see if I can figure out Canvas. Big joke. So thank you all very much. This is really
Peter's cooking dinner.
I mean, me, yeah, I am not IT oriented, but I said, okay, I'll try to log into my Canvas and call support. But thank you all very much.
Thanks, Roz. Thank you. Yeah, I think Roz raises a great point that we don't have to do this through WIT, but WIT has been so, it kind of has, it's just been organic, and I think we have to just remember that we're CDTRP isn't tethered either. We can, if this was a successful, and clearly it seems to have been a successful event, then we could certainly find venues, virtual or not, to hold similar events. I think the other piece that was very helpful is to bring in people who are not traditional, they like Linda, as a wonderful, wonderful example of a patient family partner, so that we have learned to go outside of the traditional kind of boundaries of research, people who are involved, and bring in, and I'd like to point out, I don't know if she's still on. Oh yeah, Kate's on, Kate Lavonne, who's a former student of mine, who's now an accountant, who, is interested, as interested citizens are, in becoming part of the greater dialogue. And so I think we can welcome Kate. We all are enriched by Birmingham, and Claire's stories, amazing stories about these ministers. I just love that. So if this, in the, putting my CDTRP hat on, we can do lots of things like this. And I think we clearly, all we need is the enthusiastic people to participate, as you all have. Thank you all so much. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Yeah, this has been an amazing day, and I'm happy that we had such rich discussions today, and it's time to go, unfortunately. But while we left the email for Katie's email in the chat box, if you guys want to take note and participate in any of the working groups we have at the CTTRP, and we can continue the discussions there. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all our speakers for coming in today and late in the night for some of you. I wish you all a restful night and see you in person next year, hopefully. Take care, you all.